Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a CIPD event. So how are you guys feeling this morning? Good, good. Thank you for taking the time to travel over to join us at this event. Either via car, via MRT, or via flight. So those people that is traveling slightly further, and those that is traveling from Singapore, we welcome you. So I'd like to do a short introduction. Hi, my name is Belina. I'm the Regional Director of CIPD Asia. And I'm here to welcome all of you to join us at this session on workforce mobility. So today the panel discussion will be sharing their valuable perspective on workforce mobility. And I hope that you will enjoy the session and do give us some feedback as well. Before the session starts, I would like to invite Mr. Peter Cheese, who is our CEO, to deliver an opening remark. So Peter, please.
Right, good morning. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be back. Terence was just reminding me that we first met 10 years ago, because that's how long I've been the CEO of the CIPD. And that time has flown by. When I started the job, I remember saying to my wife, I thought this was a sort of 4 to 5 year gig, and then I'd go and do something else. But oh my goodness, if I reflect back on the last 10 years, and particularly the last 2 or 3, there's been so much change that's been happening. And what is interesting, and what makes these sorts of conversations so relevant, is that a lot of what's been happening is also impacting the profession of HR. Because the reality is that a lot of the big trends that we've all been observing, beginning with things like technologies and having to upskill and reskill, all of the sort of geopolitical change that's happening now, making us think more strategically or longer term about where we're going to get the skills and capabilities and who do we trust to work with, through to social and demographic change, expectations of younger generations coming into the workplace. And of course, all of that being overlaid and reinforced by crises. And crises, to me, are opportunities as well. There was that old expression, I think it was Winston Churchill who first said it, is never let a good crisis go to waste. And the reality is crises drive change as well, and they tend to accelerate underlying thinking. So if we look at things like some of the discussion we're going to have today, the expectations of the workforce today about things like flexible working. Well, that wasn't entirely new, but it needed a big stimulus of the pandemic to prove to us all and to prove to business leaders that actually, you know what? We can work in different ways. So it's been an extraordinary time, and as I said, as the chief executive of the CIPD, I get to meet a lot of different people. We've during the period of the pandemic, our influence has grown because so many people are looking at where do I get information and what's going on, and what's a trusted source of knowledge and content and learning. So we continue to grow. We have 160,000 members worldwide, and I'm absolutely thrilled to recognize and welcome those of you who are members of the CIPD here today. As Belina said, I think this is one of our first events since all the lockdowns and shutdowns and all the crazy stuff we've had to endure over the last few years. But as a profession, as I said, this is a time of great opportunity and great change. And our role, and I think many of the roles of other organizations that we work with in this room, are to help to support the profession, to help it grow, to help it have the skills and competencies so they can really challenge and understand these issues at the most strategic levels, engage with business leaders, and as Terence and I were just talking about, sit on boards and things like that. Because what has also happened is if HR wasn't always seen as strategic or having a voice at the top table, my goodness, it is now. Because every business leader, certainly that I talk to, says, wow, when I look at my organization today, it's all about the people. It's about, as I said, things like skills and capabilities, of course, but it's also about these really human parts of the workforce, well-being, which is a really, really important theme. And how do we create environments, work environments that are actually good for people? Yesterday was World Mental Health Day. And there was some research published last week by the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, that said across the world they estimated that 12 billion working days a year are lost because of issues of mental health. stress and long-term absence from work, things of that nature. And that is costing the global economy, by their estimate, $1 trillion a year. Now, these are really, really important themes for us collectively. They're very important themes for us as a profession. These are subjects I've been passionate about for a very long time myself personally. And I honestly say, if you look at the future of work, one of the things we have to collectively create is work that is good for people. We've got to put people much more front and center in the business agenda. We've got to see that things like well-being is a business outcome as well as a societal outcome. And if we can create better well-being in our working environments, then we will help people give more of themselves to the organizations that we're creating. So we'll talk more about some of these subjects, I'm sure, during the panel. As I said, it's a real pleasure to be back in the region again, see many familiar faces. I very much continue to look forward to our work as the CIPD in supporting our membership, but also working with so many of you, working with you in different organizations, IHRP and SNEF and the NTUC and Skills Future and obviously the ministry. There's so many relationships over the years that we continue to build, and we know how important those are in this part of the world. And helping you all and helping Singapore also have its voice in terms of influencing some of this future of work. And I'm also really pleased to see how, as an organization, we continue to grow our relationships with organizations. Because the other thing that I would say about the profession, having said that this is such an important time for all that we do, is I have said for many, many years that one of our challenges as a profession is we haven't invested enough in ourselves. I've often used the expression that HR is the cobbler's children. You know, we worry about everybody else's capabilities and skills. We haven't done enough about our own. And the reality is, as I said, there is a lot more pressure, a lot more demand on what we do as an HR profession. And as I said, we all have a role in that, but it's a role I take very seriously as the CIPD, what a professional institute and body should stand for. Yeah, helping to understand the competencies and the skills and helping with the developmental programs to lift the capabilities of the profession, but also the confidence of the profession, because we haven't always been confident enough to challenge some of the things that we see going on in business. And I'm very proud of the fact that in the region we do work with a number of very big organizations. We're doing a lot of work with Petronas in Malaysia. Tony and I are going up to Kuala Lumpur tomorrow evening, so I've got a pretty crazy schedule this week. I was in Dubai last week as well, you know, reconnecting with a lot of people there. With Standard Chartered and with Yushin Health and organizations like that and others of you in the room. And this is something that we are building more and more. So we're supporting individuals, but really importantly also helping organizations understand the skills and capabilities against the kind of standards that we have, which are internationally recognized, and then helping you to develop those skills and capabilities. So as I said, at one level, we live, well, it's that old expression, isn't it? We live in interesting times. And when you add up, as I said, all the things that are going on, you think, yeah, it is really interesting. But it is also extremely challenging. So the final thought that I would leave you with is and I see this a lot in Singapore environments like this, is the more that we connect and the more that we share and the more that we work together as a community through all our different influences and channels, then the more that we can help each other. Because as I said, this is a critical inflection point, in my view, in the world of work and the future of work, a real inflection point with many, many different ideas coming to the table, many different challenges. And not one of us individually as an organization can solve all of this. And therefore, how we collaborate, how we share, and how we strengthen and support the community, which you all represent, and all the different channels that you represent, that is what I think we collectively need to do. And I look forward to seeing Singapore continuing to be a part of the world that speaks up, that represents good values, that represents good principles, and that has a voice that punches way above its weight. And that is why we're here. It goes without saying, you know this. This is one of the reasons why we came here, is because Singapore is a real hub. It's a hub of global organizations, but it's also a hub of global thinking. And we want to connect both into the global thinking so we can all learn together, but we also, of course, and certainly when I started as a CEO, many of our clients and many of our members are saying, we want to see you in Asia because we're a multinational organization. And we all know that Asia is one of the biggest growth markets in the world, and we need help. And that's why we're here, and that's why we will continue to be here and continue to commit to supporting the context of Singapore, the relationships in Singapore, the future of the profession in Singapore, and then, of course, out across the region, ASEAN and the wider Asia community. So this is our opportunity, right? And today, I think, is an absolute exemplar of that we're bringing together different voices to share on all of this debate. And the subject of workforce mobility, as Terence and I were discussing, can go off in all sorts of directions. And you are a senior group. You're hand-picked in many ways. It's not a big mass event. You all have views on this subject. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. And again, it's a real pleasure to be back here after 3 years of having to all stay at home and be locked down. And every jacket, do you find this? Every jacket I put on, I find there's a mask in it, right? In fact, yes, there you go, there's a mask. Yeah. And thank goodness we've got rid of those. But viruses don't go away. Yeah, hopefully we managed to manage it and control it. But it has been a very tough time when we've all been isolated. And I think 3 years ago I didn't have to wear glasses quite as much. But having spent 3 years looking at computer screens, my eyesight's got a lot worse. But anyway, that's enough from me. So big welcome to all of you, and I very much look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So now I'd like to invite the panelists and the moderator, Mr. Terence Craig. He's CEO of Singapore Institute of Directors, to come on stage to join Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? So good morning. May I just invite all my wonderful panelists to join me as well. And as they come up, I will give a short introduction of each of them. So I'd like to invite Mr. Khairul Faizi Abdul Karim, who is the Learning Specialist Principal, Leadership Consultancy and Innovation for Petronas. Please give me a round of applause. Thank you. Also, Ms. Lupekam, Chief Human Resources Officer, Singapore Public Service Division, Prime Minister's Office. Let's give it up for Lupekam as well. And last but not least, we have Ms. Pooja Javari, DNI and Leadership Development Director, London Stock Exchange Group. So good morning, everyone. My name is Terence, once again, from Singapore Institute of Directors. It's a big pleasure for me to be sitting here to moderate this. I was just recalling with Peter how we met 10 years ago, so I'm a big fan of CIPD's work. Before we go further, can I just quick show of hands, how many of you are members of CIPD? Great. Now, the next question is actually more important, right? How many of you are not members of CIPD? Oh, yet? Yet? Okay, so CIPD staff, please take note who they are. Yet? Yeah, not members yet, so take note of who they are so they can approach them and share a little bit more about CIPD. Obviously, today we are really here to talk about workforce mobility. I've got a really distinguished panel here. In a short while, I would like to hear a little bit more about what roles they play in their various organizations, and therefore give you a bit of a context of which perspectives they could represent as we talk about workforce mobility. As Peter has chimed in earlier, right? This topic is so broad, it can go in so many different directions, but I really want to make sure that we cover as much ground and also leave room for you to also voice your comments, your questions, and we're going to do that fairly casually, if you don't mind. We really want to involve you in this conversation. So think of this as a big conversation, not just among the five of us. So the panelists have kind of like agreed in a way to take the pressure off them a little bit, right? Just to make sure that you guys are also involved in this conversation. I've got a couple of things lined up. So in terms of conversation, we're going to weave you in. We are going to have microphones from our CIPD staff. And can you wave if you are holding the microphones? That's right. So our team from CIPD will be walking around. So if you have a question, just pop your hand up. There is no specific time for you to do that. Okay? As and when you feel like you want to share your comments, if you have a case study or if something resonates with you or you disagree with a particular point, feel free to put up your hand. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So please do that. And before we start, maybe it's nice to just hear from some of our panelists, what are some of the roles that they play? So I'm just going to start kind of like from my right. So starting with Pooja. Pooja is from the London Stock Exchange, and her role is in DNI and leadership development as a director. So maybe Pooja, just say a little bit more about, in your role, what do you actually do at the London Stock Exchange, please?
So I do a lot of talking, is the reality.
That's
but-
good. That's why you're here as well, right?
Exactly. No, but in all seriousness, so let me give you a little bit of context, and then I can talk about exactly why we're doing what we're doing, right? So London Stock Exchange Group, 300-year-old company. We recently acquired 2 years ago an organization called Refinitiv. What that did for us is we went from 5,000 people to 25,000 people globally. What it also did for us is that it changed our geographical footprint entirely. My role specifically is really to represent and elevate the role of Asia, right? We were historically a very London and New York focused organization. Now we're 54% in Asia. Right, so that's a significant chunk, obviously, and we've never really invested or needed to have local resources here. I look after leadership development, and that means looking at it from an end-to-end career journey, right from early graduates, how do we raise them, how do we develop them with that leadership capability and foundational skills, all the way till they become our EXCO members. I also represent D&I. I lead that for the region, and what that means at this point is it's very nascent. We've made some bold commitments and metrics. 40% of our leadership team will be underrepresented groups. That may be ethnicity, that may be gender, but what it also means is that locally, what does diversity and inclusion actually mean? And that's the work that me and my team are doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to tap on Pooja a little bit from the perspective of talent development, also looking from the APEC kind of a region perspective. I'm going to turn my attention next to Faizi. So Faizi, share a little bit more about your role in your organization. Obviously, Petronas need not much introduction, but share a little bit more anyway.
All right, thank you very much, Terence. Very good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to learn and to share. For those of you who are not familiar with Petronas, Petronas is an energy company, oil and gas. And of late, we're embarking into a journey towards energy transition. So there is a huge shift in the way we look at our business portfolio, as well as our talent composition mix. So we have this interesting word that we often use, retooling human capital equation. Sounds mouthful in that sense, but it's really about reallocating our portfolio of talents to support newer businesses, opportunity for Petronas. What I do, I lead innovative leadership solution. So basically, we drive a solution to promote innovation culture, agile way of working, promoting agile enterprise, and I'm also responsible for Digital Academy. So it's really about upskilling, reskilling our talents towards the digital adoption, because there's a lot more newer technology that we have invested in, so we need to maximize the use of it, and all this AI, machine learning, whatever. If people are not equipped to make use of it, then chances are it's going to be a waste. So that's basically what I do for Petronas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Faizi. So clearly we have two representatives from enterprises, right? So one really based out of a really established organization from London and then going out into APAC. And then how does that translate into some of the HR or people policies? And then we have another very successful organization based in Malaysia and then growing globally. So again, one is from outside of APAC growing into APAC, and then the other one is from within APAC growing into the world. So it would be interesting to hear their different perspectives. And then Pekam, I think she needs not much introduction, but could you clear, that doesn't mean I'm letting you off yet, right? So could you share a little bit about some of the roles that you play within your organization?
Hi, good morning. My name is Pekam. And I'm the Chief HR Officer for the Singapore Public Service. And Singapore Public Service in Singapore is by large the single largest employer in Singapore. And we serve about 153,000 public officers, which of course serve Singapore businesses as well as citizens. So my role as a CHRO is really to uplift the capabilities of HR within the Singapore Public Service, and to really see how we can then transform HR within the public service. And the vision that collectively my colleagues and myself have come up with, and this was 5 years ago, is that we want the Singapore Public Service to be the employer of choice, so much so that private sector HR practitioners will look towards us to say, well, if the government is doing this, or if the Singapore Public Service is having this progressive people practice, they can't go too wrong, okay? And to really be the lead in good and progressive HR practices. And I have another hat, which is also the twice elected president for the Singapore Human Resources Institute. And this is where, you know, doing this at a national level, or how do you help practitioners, especially in Singapore, to really uplift their capabilities and really to give a voice to HR practitioners in Singapore. So I like what Peter said, you know, HR practitioners, we are sometimes like cobbler's children. We take care of everybody, but we forget to take care of ourselves. So sometimes at SHRI, what we want to do is really to bring back the message of why are you in HR? And, you know, you are not just serving the people and just fighting the union or what have you, but really what's the purpose of a very people-centered profession. So to really bring that passion back into HR and bring the people back into human resources.
Okay, thank you very much, Beckham. And of course, she has done a lot more than just what she has just mentioned. And if I don't remember, and I'm going to count on Peter to help me on this, but I believe Beckham is the first Asian to receive a CIPD title. And what is his title again?
Chartered Companion, which is our highest level.
There we go, Chartered Companion. I think she deserves a round of applause for leading the way and for really putting Singapore on the world map as well, based on everything that she's done for the HR community and beyond. So thank you very much, Peckham. And so we've heard for all three. I'm going to leave Peter out of this because he already gave his introduction, so we don't want to take more time. But I think now that we have known a little bit more about the panelists, I think it's nice to hear who is in the audience today. So I would like to request that you bring out your phone, your smartphone. You will notice that there are 2 10 cards, right? The white 10 cards that's on the tabletop. It comes with a QR code. We're going to put a QR code on the screen as well. So please scan the QR code. And there's a quick question there for you. So if you don't mind, just scan that and tell us a little bit about the first question. The first question is a bit of a warm-up, right? The question is, how are you feeling right now? There's only 2 choices. It's either A, I'm ready to take on the world, or B, I need more coffee. Okay, that is also the cue for our wait staff standing by. Just in case you really do need more coffee, they're going to flash some across to you. Okay, are we all okay with the, yeah? Anybody needs a bit more time? No? All right, let's have a look at your answers. Wow, what are the chances of that? Okay, panelists, I think we've got a tough road ahead of us. We need to work a little bit harder just to make sure everybody else can take on the world. All right, so second question. Let's look at the second question. What best describes your current role? Are you a C-suite leader? Are you consider yourself as a mid-management leader? Or are you a specialist? Okay, and it's really open for interpretation. So this, just give a bit more time for people to put in your answers. Okay, this is just to give us a sense of who is in the audience today. Okay, so almost a third of each, thereabouts. Yeah, a little bit more in the mid-management level. So panelists, this gives you a sense of who we are speaking to as the audience. All right, the next question. How familiar are you with the term workforce mobility? Given that this is the topic of our panel discussion, I think it'll be interesting to hear how you rate your own familiarity, right? So is it A, I practically live and breathe it, or B, I know enough to hold a conversation about it, or C, I've been acquainted with the concept? That sounds very much like the Asian, very modest kind of an answer, right? Actually, you know a lot, but you don't dare to tell people, I know a little bit, but actually you're a huge expert, right? Or D, not at all, okay, which is fine, right? We're not judging here, right? We just want to get a sense of where we are. Okay, pretty much like how I predicted, I think most of us would just say we are being acquainted with the concept, right? About 18% thinks that you are practically live and breathe it. So we can count on about 20% of you, for some expert opinions or comments to share, and a small percentage of you saying that you know enough to hold a conversation. That's nice. All right, next one. when it comes to workforce mobility, okay, again, this is related to your role. Do you, A, lead or have led that strategy? So thinking about your own organization, did you come up with a strategy? Were you involved in it? Did you drive it? Or B, you played a supporting role, or you have played, right? Maybe in your previous organization or a different role right now because you have moved on. You played a supporting role, but you didn't drive it, right? You're not the key decision maker, but you're just supporting it. Or C, you were not involved in the strategy. Somebody else in your organization was involved in the strategy, you're not involved. Or maybe there was no strategy. That could be it as well, which is why you're not involved, okay? So let's hear your answers. So more than 50% of you have played a supporting role, and only about 12% of you sitting in this room really are on the front and center of driving that strategy. It's interesting that a third of you in this room are actually not involved in the strategy, okay? So that's a nice way to paint a picture. And then finally, the fifth question, just before we begin our conversation, I have personally benefited from workforce mobility measures and initiatives, yes or no? So were you a product of workforce mobility? Did you benefit from any of these initiatives? Okay, let's have a look. Good, so a larger majority, about more than 60%, have benefited from some kind of measures or initiatives from workforce mobility. About a third of you feel that you're not a beneficiary of that. Okay, so that gives us a nice kind of a context of who we have in the audience. So talking about workforce mobility, let's hear from our panelists, right? What is workforce mobility? So how do we answer this question? Maybe I'll get Peter to start us with, how do we define workforce mobility? How do you define workforce mobility?
Yeah, I describe it very broadly, but if I go back sort of historically, I remember even in this region, actually, I think of EY, for example, as a consulting firm, and I used to work in Accenture for many years. EY had a global mobility function in their consulting business. But what that meant is, how did I ship one person from one country to another and deal with their visas and all of that? The subject we're really debating now is much bigger. It's about how people come into and move on from organizations, about how we access talent and skills, perhaps globally and internationally, and what are the trends driving all of that. It's about strategic workforce planning. You know, if our workforce is changing, it's changing in the sense of it is more mobile. There are many trends which are driving that. But also it's changing in terms of the skills that we need. So to me, mobility is a very big and very strategic subject today. And ultimately is about shaping the workforce of the future. These very big questions about, where do I get the skills and capabilities? What are the trends driving all of this? These choices that I have to make now about, and I have a little phrase which I've used a lot. Do I buy, build, borrow, or bot? Do I buy and recruit the talent? Do I build it and develop it? And they're not all mutually exclusive, of course. Do I borrow it in terms of partnering or outsourcing and contingent labor? Or do I find ways of automating? And what does that mean in terms of the future of jobs and skills? So it is, as we both said, Terence, I think it's a very big subject, and I think we need to think about it in that very strategic way.
So moving away from the physical, geographical moving of labor to a much more bigger strategic one that really encompasses the inflows, the outflows, the planning, and I like the keyword strategic. Let's hear from our two enterprise representatives. What is your definition of workforce mobility? How does Petronas look at it?
All right, thank you very much. From Petronas' perspective, we are moving towards energy transition. So as we move towards energy transition, we are seeing more newer opportunities that goes beyond traditional engineering work that we see. We have always been a competency-based organization, and developing competency for our engineers, those who are not in the technical line is very crucial. But then we are beginning to see shift in the competency mix that is required for the position, particularly when we start introducing digital, agile innovation. Say, for example, we also note that there's quite a number of our staff who's actually interested in entrepreneurial. And that, of course, again, provided the opportunity for the organization to look what else can we provide, in a way, to support the motivation that is driving within the fire, within the staff towards entrepreneurship. So how do we go about helping talents take on some of these newer opportunities that has never existed before? What sort of platform? It used to be pretty easy. Engineering, we send people for engineering programs and things like that. But for things like entrepreneurship, innovation, startup kind of thing, it's pretty new for organizations such as Petronas. So how do we don't have, like, say, I think some of us are familiar with 10, 20, 70, right? So the 70% is the experience base. And in Petronas, there's not that many 70% experience in the space of innovation and startup. And Petronas being an oil and gas energy company, safety is very important. So how do we provide sandboxes to help people be acquainted with newer skills, testing out newer things in a safe manner? And I think that's very crucial because in organizations such as Petronas, in plant environment, you do one mistake, it costs people's life. So people are conditioned in that sense. So how do we move their mindset towards something that is more experimental in that sense? Again, providing that sandbox is very crucial. Yeah.
Thank you for landing that. So Peter started with that big definition of workforce mobility and the key word there being strategic. And then Faizi added by talking about competency, and then hear a bit about mindset as well. Pooja, what would you add?
I would echo what Peter and Faizi have said. From an LSEG perspective and other organizations that I've had the privilege of working at, I would say it is very much around building careers, right? So you could start off at an organization as an entry-level person, right, straight out of college, whatever it is, and you grow, right? To me, that is also workforce mobility, right? Just because you started off, let's say, in a call center does not mean that you are now restricted to doing that for the rest of your life. Of course, we're very, very conscious about making sure that, we give people the opportunity to follow their aspirations and their passion. And that could be within a country, it could be within a region, it could be globally. We also see a fair few people who go out on secondments, come back, bring in those best practices as well, right? So if I was to summarize it, it really is creating the opportunity to follow a passion and truly build a career, as opposed to think about it in terms of this is my job and this is all I'm ever going to do. So with that comes the education, comes the experience that you were referring to, Faizi, as well. It comes, looking at digitalization externally in bringing the thought leadership, right? How do we collectively, as a community at LSEG, grow together and support each other in that growth as well?
So it's about creating opportunity and tapping into the passions of the individuals as well, right? Peckham, from a national, governmental perspective, how would you define workforce mobility?
Well, I will speak beyond just government perspective because I came from the private sector. and I still remember, I used to work in the Ministry of Manpower for a while. And having worked in the private sector, one of the challenges which I think a lot of the regional HR people, especially based in Singapore, will complain about is that Singaporeans are not very mobile, right? You have nice, big, cushy jobs based in India, Chennai, and all that. And when you ask, hey, do you want to go? Is a promotion with all this? And then you relocate the whole family. And all you need is, with school-going kids in Singapore, no, it's okay. So sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot because we create such a nice, comfortable environment here. And at a national level, we actually create Singapore so that we are able to attract even expats and make them feel like this is home. So much so that many instances, we have expats who come over to Singapore to work on expat terms. And eventually, when we want to, ask them, yeah, you can go back, they say, can I localize? I don't want to go back to where I come from. So I think right smack, like what Peter said, I think in the past, when we talk about workforce mobility, it is really what do your business need? What kind of composition of workforce? What kind of competencies do we want from these people to bring in so that your business can succeed? Increasingly, especially with new age technology and all that, so I used to joke about, post-COVID, right? When we are saying that, oh, you can ask your people to come back to the office 3 days a week or something like that, and that's best practices. How many of you have your employees who come back and tell you, oh, but my work can be done from home, so I don't really have to come back to the office. I don't want to come back to the office. How many of you have employees who then want to say, if you force me, I will complain to MOM, I'll complain to TAFAB, right? So while we enjoy that kind of flexibility, I think be careful what we wish for, because if all of your work can be done remotely, it need not be remotely at your house, it need not be remotely in Singapore, it can be remotely in Philippines or Malaysia or anywhere else. So that mobility that you want for yourself, as an organization, when you see that, hey, that's the mobility that I can acquire, and like what Izzy said, right? I'm looking for the kind of competency that I need. It doesn't quite matter whether you're a Singaporean or wherever, and wherever you're located. In fact, Salesforce, which was hiring aggressively, they stopped hiring based on geography. They were hiring based on, of course, competencies, but competencies based on time zone. So it doesn't matter that people have to sleep. Yeah, you sleep during your sleep time, but when I hire people on time zone, I will always have people who are working. So I think the whole idea of workforce mobility has shifted with the aid of technology, and organizations really need to plan very carefully and stop planning like in the 80s where, you need the warm bodies in the office in order to get things done. There are some work that needs to be done face-to-face that you need the warm bodies in the office. But that will be part of what you need in the strategic workforce plan, right? But we need to think beyond and use technology as an enabler and really use workforce mobility as an asset and not make it into something which is a make or break.
So this is a really nice segue to talk about workforce mobility as a topic. Obviously, if we had this panel discussion 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, the conversation is completely different, right? With workforce mobility, obviously, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities for companies to demonstrate, how progressive they are in terms of how they are looking after their workforce, development, talent, and so on. But it also sounds like there's a lot of risk. So what are some challenges that you are seeing from your perspective when it comes to workforce mobility? I mean, Peter, do you want to paint a global picture, like some of the clients and people you interacted with?
Yeah, there are lots of things that are driving this. And you're right, Peckham, about Singapore, but interestingly, we tend to inhabit, this room tends to inhabit a part of the workforce that is much more inclined to be more mobile, chasing jobs, careers, whatever. The majority of the world's population actually is quite happy staying where it is. And there are a lot of stats that show this, that there are many people that grow up and live and work in the same, not much further than 50 kilometers from where they were born. And so when we talk about mobility of the workforce, it's not always been true. There is a certain strata of the workforce that's been more mobile. But absolutely, as Peckham said, of course, that whole idea of mobility is shifting now because I can access skills and talent from lots of different places. Flexible working from home, organizations tapping into talent pools around the world and then being able to access them in very different ways. But now you've got another layer that's coming into this, which is very challenging, which is geopolitical. The geopolitical world we live in now is extremely confusing. I mean, a lot of us grew up in a world where we were headed towards globalization. That was the big sort of guiding light. And that meant free movement of goods, labor, and services. Borders were open to us. I always used to say there were very few countries you couldn't go to or access, like North Korea. But my goodness, that has changed. And in the last 10 years, not just the recent events in the Ukraine, but it feels like the handbrake's been pulled on. Right? So a lot of the debate internationally and globally has been more about, well, I got to look after myself. I got to look after my own people first. The nationalization agendas and things of that nature, and of course that's been greatly accelerated by the war in the Ukraine, which is a tragedy all by itself. But it's sort of redrawing maps of the world that feel like look like they were 50 years ago. So there's another very big dimension of this, which is geopolitical, and it ranges from all the way to, do I have to rethink global supply chains? You know, what we were building over the last 20 or 30 years was an idea that I could source products and services from almost anywhere, and that I could trust that that was going to get delivered to where I needed to get it delivered to. Now you got not just one crisis, but there's a second crisis, which is driving thinking about things like global supply chain, which is environmental. So we got geopolitical and environmental pressures on organizations saying, you know what, maybe I do have to rethink some of this. Maybe I've got to think much more about, actually I've got to build the capabilities of my own country and nation, because that's more secure. We hear a lot of this language now about, I've got to create energy security, or I've got to reduce my dependence on others because I'm not sure who I can trust anymore. And that is a massive shift that is going on, and of course affects the ways that we think about talent and access to talent. Yeah, in the United Kingdom, Brexit has already forced us to rethink a lot about, can we access incoming migration into the country, which we were so used to for so many years from around the world, but particularly from the European Union. That's all changed. And there are many of those dynamics going on. So I think this question has become a much bigger question now about, yes, I can access talent through some of the mechanisms that Ken talked about. We have social dynamics about whether people want to move or not, and there's evidence they seem to be retrenching almost. And even the idea of how long I want to stay within organizations. You know, so the old adage of it's a job for life. For years we've been talking about this. It's not a job for life, it's a life of jobs. And therefore, all these ideas about retention and attraction have changed. But now, as I said, you layer on top of that these much bigger strategic operating model debates in organizations that I think are happening everywhere about, so who do I trust? What do I do about global supply chains? If I'm recruiting talent from some country that I might have done, like the Ukraine, and there were many businesses recruiting some great talent in the Ukraine, can I do that anymore? And should I be doing that anymore? Is my government going to tell me I can't do that anymore? So this has elevated the conversations about things like global mobility to a whole nother level as well, which is very challenging.
I'm just going to pick on a little bit about your point. And again, we recognize that workforce mobility is a huge issue, but let's go down the track a little bit about attracting and retaining talent, right? Because Pegam already talked about how let's look at workforce as the asset. So I think, you know, some clients or some business owners may still possibly have that mentality that, well, I don't really want to invest too much in my people, right? Because what happens if they leave? Because they're so mobile, right? So that topic of talent attraction and retention seems to be a very big one. And given the complexity of geopolitical changes, as well as the opportunities that remote working and tech is offering companies, meaning you can really tap into different time zones, competency by time zones, for example. What are some of your organizations doing? Let's get to the heart of that, right? So what are you doing in terms of attracting and retaining talent, given how mobile, maybe use the word mobile, the workforce is today? Pooja, why don't you share a little bit?
Sure. I'd like to come at this question two-pronged, right? I think it's really more important than ever for organizations to have a perspective on what does talent mean to me and who do we want to be? If you think about like the consulting firms, you know that every single associate is not going to become a partner. They're very happy to consider themselves as a talent factory, as we often call them, right? You come here, you gain some really solid experience, and that really propels and accelerates your career, right? Other organizations want to bring in good talent and retain them, grow them. And oftentimes it hurts them, right? Because you can't possibly grow and develop every single person, right? Other organizations are very comfortable having boomerangs. You leave, you get some more experience, and then you come back and you teach us, right? So I think it's really critical in this day and age to make sure that you have a strategy in terms of, you know, who is your talent? What do you want to do with them? How are you going to grow and develop them? The second part of the question, I guess, is what are we doing at LSEG, right? And so at LSEG, I would say that we've got different streaks for different folks, if you will. So very much, being able to identify who is our key talent, what are our key markets, what are those key roles within the markets, right? That's the first step. As I said, it's been 2 years of integration. We're still learning, right? Who are the key players? Also having that outside-in perspective, right? One of the things I would say is that we're no longer just competing with our competitors, right? So our Bloombergs, etc. It's no longer a major competition. How do we, from a sustainability perspective, from an environmental perspective, put our heads together? How do we become true thought leaders? And how do we make sure that we're doing the right thing, not just for the planet and our people, but also in terms of our customers, right? And putting them front and center becomes even more critical.
Got it. What about that, Faizi? How do you tackle the workforce mobility issue?
All right, interesting question. And the reason for saying that is that I've been with Petronas for, 18 years already.
18 years,
18
okay.
years, yes.
So here's one example which is not about the life of jobs, but it's a lifetime job. Great.
Yeah, I thought I would probably stay in the organization a lot shorter than that, but somehow or other, 18 years, here I am with Petronas. And I gather most of my colleagues are also like that, who have served organization beyond 18, 20 years. I get that the question is not so much about, for those who are inside the organization, retaining them, because I gather it's not that difficult to retain, but how do we continue to motivate them? How do you get the most out of them? What are, I use the word, newer career options and opportunities that might spark interest that otherwise would have been dim over the years. If you're doing engineering work and continue to do so, some people love to be in the same location. We call them implementation specialists. These people really love what they do. They touch a machine and they can tell you that it will need maintenance in the next 3 months. This is how good they are, right? And they like being where they are, and they get rewarded for being where they are. But there are people in the organization who wants to explore newer options and newer opportunities. And it is a question of how do we open it up. And nowadays, we have, I use the word young engineers. You say young engineers, they are between 30 to 35, 36, something like that, who wants to explore areas such as innovation, such as startup. So how do we create, we have all those opportunities, how do we open it up? So I think the question is, how do we make those opportunities transparent for people so that when the opportunities are there, it's, we advertise, people can look at it, they see what are the competency set that are required for those opportunities, and what are the development options. Because no point if we say these are the competency demand, but there is no way in which those competency can be managed and can be developed. Or even to a point of, since they have that motivation, can we take risk on talent by exposing them to certain opportunity without taking too much risk? Again, that concept of sandboxing, right? So how do we sandbox it as such that, they can work with some startup accelerator or become an innovation coach. Opportunities that otherwise, we have these drillers, right? So they like working in platforms and things like that. They just want to have a shift. And we open up an opportunity for them to work on LNG commercial. So he loved commercial so much that he decided, I don't want to do drilling anymore. I want to do LNG commercial. Right? Okay, all right. And let's use that passion as a way of, motivating. So I get that. For Petronas, it's all about, how do we re-energize, and we have this value proposition, right? Trust, growth, and reward. So trusting that the organization will do its best to provide the best condition for people to work, and making sure that, the environment being taken care of, sustainability are being taken care of to some degree and extent, and making sure that they feel that they're growing in the organization. Hence, it is important when we take a talent that we want to make sure that they can grow and progress in the organization and not just stay and do one thing. And even if they do one thing, better be sure that they are, sorry, excuse the word, they're damn good at doing it in that sense, right? Okay, all right.
Yeah, sounds like the two of you have very similar, in terms of your organizations, like very similar kind of strategies. Really like different streaks for different folks, identifying the passions and then creating the opportunities. I really like the idea of sandboxing, especially coming from a company that's placing so much emphasis on safety. We tend to worry so much about failures as well, right? I'm going to turn to Peckham in a short while to hear from her in terms of how Singapore government is really tackling this workforce mobility issue. But I just want to open up to the floor as well. If you have a question, a comment, or you'd like to join this conversation, or some reflection, a quick reflection of your thoughts, please put up your hand so that we can get your mic across to you, and I'll bring you into the conversation after Peckham, right? So put our hands and then we'll bring you in. Peckham, would you like to share a little bit about, from the Singapore government's perspective? I know you've been doing a lot to try and make the public service a very attractive place for Singaporeans to go to. So could you share a bit more about the strategies and the thinking behind it?
Yeah, I think we all know that mobility is important, and especially when you're doing your workforce planning, right? Don't you wish that you can just shift people around, regardless of where they are? So we know that that is a strength, and sometimes in HR we tend to hire people to fit a particular profile of job. So if you go and take a look at your job advertisements on LinkedIn or what have you, we kind of design it to fit into, a straw person, okay? I think what Petronas have done is, can you imagine if every one of our job description basically only tells you, these are the competencies that I'm looking for, okay? You know what competencies you have. You don't have to double guess. I don't really care whether, unless you're a doctor or an engineer, that you need a qualified certification. In fact, I think HR also need a qualified certification in order to practice HR, because we are dealing with people's work lives, which affects their home lives. So we should actually make sure we go get your IHRP certification, and SHRI can train you to get the certification.
Good plug for two organizations here today.
Yeah, but I think it's important to really, we are pushing for competency-based HR management system, okay? But why are we doing that? Because we want our leaders to stop hoarding talent, okay? How many of you, and sometimes when you say, oh, this line is not really very, the business is not too good, I want to move this person to the other side, they will fight you arm and teeth, right? Say, no, I took so long for me to justify for this headcount. I cannot give this headcount away and all that. So one thing which COVID taught us, so mobility is a strength. Okay, workforce mobility is a key strength. I think it's a business imperative. But sometimes our HR processes, okay, not only HR, finance processes also, okay, of how we ring fence the different people, put them in different pockets, and how we ring fence the job that, okay, this is. And sometimes you hear people say, oh, this one is beyond my pay grade, not my area. But if you hire people based on competencies, and if you are able to move people around, it will give them that incentive to say that, well, I need to acquire that skill so that I can be more mobile and I can be more ready for the future. Okay, there's no such thing as future-proof. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. You can't prove it. So at the individual level, the best thing to do is make sure that you are agile and give yourself that mobility. So a lot of people say that public service is iron rice bowl, no need to worry. Okay. So what I'm telling my public officers, all 153,000 of them, public service may be an iron rice bowl, but every one of you is a mere grain of rice in the iron rice bowl. Okay. If you don't upgrade yourself, if you don't make sure that you remain relevant and you are not mobile, okay, mobile not necessarily geographical, but mobile in terms of how I can deploy you and whether you have the relevant skills and the aptitude and the passion to want to continue to learn, to grow, you could easily fall out of that iron rice bowl. Okay, so our focus is not so much on lifelong employment. Our focus is on lifelong employability. My obligation is I want to make sure that you remain employable beyond even public service. So what we are doing is we are quite generous with making sure that if you are in this job and you're doing well, okay, for the last 5 years, we'll kind of give you a nudge. Hey, you're doing well. You know? Is it time for you to look at something else? So we do have a structured job rotation program that we literally tell you, hey, move. Go to somewhere else and go to another section, go to another department, or go to another agency. Okay, you could do the same kind of work, but different culture, different environment, from an economic sector to a social sector. It gives you that ability to continue to learn, to grow, and to be exposed. Not only that, we even open to the private sector. Okay, we have a talent attachment program where we will pull some of our talent, okay, and we will tell them, and we will curate with private sector organizations. I'm sure quite a lot of you will come and look for me after this, because it's hugely popular with the private sector, overseas included. So what we do is we want to give our public officers an experience in the private sector. So it could be a 6 months to 2 years private sector attachment. And these are my talent pool. So I will attach them, for example, attach them to Petronas. Okay? And these are not interns, they are my talent pool. So I will tell Faizi, say, I will attach to you for 6 months. Please treat them well. Okay, they will contribute. And if it's an engineer, they'll do what, and of course you have MOU that you sign, that make sure intellectual property and all that. And at the end of 6 months of contribution, and you pay a very small stipend, okay? Because what we want is a win-win for you to have an experience of having a high caliber officer or employee, okay? And for my employee to have the exposure and experience of being in a private sector, so that when they come back to their public sector job, they have an idea of, oh, this is what happens in the real world in the private sector. And when I come up with public policies, it will be a more robust and better policy. And of course, I will have an understanding with him. Please take good care of him. You can love him, but don't love him too much until you want to keep him, because I do want them back. Okay. So it's a win-win. And what this creates is really, you loosen up the hands or the claws of the department. And to Terrence's point is, what if I train them and they leave? Yeah. What if you don't train them and they stay? Okay? And honestly, when we first did some workforce planning, and I have public officers who have been on the job, same job, for the last 30 years. Okay? And when I tell the supervisor, who happened to be a CFO, I say, you got 3 of them. And with all these shared services and technological changes and, HR systems and all that, actually you only need 2. One of them, you can actually either go to another department or we deploy her to another agency. And she looked at me and said, it became easy for you to say. To you, it's just another digit on your spreadsheet. But this person has been working in my same department for the last 30 years. Not only does she not want to leave to another department in this agency, she doesn't even want to leave my department, not to talk about go to another agency. In fact, what she told me was, and she said in Mandarin, okay, so this person said, 我死也要做这个 agency 的鬼. Even when I die, I want to be a ghost in this agency.
Wow.
So I mean, if you talk about lifelong employment, okay, and you talk about iron rice bowl, and if people have the mentality of, I have this job for life, I just do and do well, I have this job for life. Okay, who do I blame? I blame HR. Because I have not given that person the opportunity to look beyond their very narrow scope. I have not educated this person on what are the consequences of you being that grain of rice that's going to fall off from that iron rice bowl? So I think, to make it real, we really have to make sure that, workforce mobility, it can only happen if we consciously put in the structures and put in the mindset shift and really reskill, redesign the jobs so that the kind of competencies that the person will acquire will make them employable for life.
Thanks for sharing that, Pekam. I can see that, taking a leaf from what you guys are doing, how mobility is so important, and, it's wonderful to see such initiatives are done by the Singapore government, and I think quite a lot of people will come to you. And I think CIPD can lay claim to an unofficial MOU that's been signed between the Singapore government and the Petronas on this stage right here, just for this workforce mobility issue. Pooja, you have something that you want to add?
Yes, actually, Peckham was talking about, the idea of very often we as individuals need to kind of have that flame within us and say that I want to try something else, right? I want to add an additional layer of complexity, and welcome for both of your thoughts, actually. This idea of, that psychological safety, right? As people leaders, very often, to the example you just gave us as well, I don't want this person to leave. They don't want to leave, right? So why are you trying to fix something that's not broken, right? On the flip side, I may not want my team to leave because, well, I invested in them. I've spent, I had to fight tooth and nail to get the headcount. They're doing a really good job. They're doing it better than I am, right? If they leave, my numbers are going to go down, right? And at the same time, how do you then protect the employee who may be looking to kind of, do something a bit different, do a stretch project, right? Not necessarily just move. They're having networking conversations. If you stop them enough times, we know, right, from the CIPD research, et cetera, that they're going to learn helplessness. They're going to stop, right? And I think that is the biggest, most dangerous thing that we can do given our current external markets and internally the competition that we have as well. So I just wanted to add that, that perspective.
Thanks for that. I think it's really important to create that kind of environment. So every strategy that a company puts in place, you have to think about the environment that you're also creating just to ensure that the strategy works as well. I'm going to turn to the floor and see if there's anyone with comments, questions that you may have for our panelists or any reflections. Yeah? Okay, it looks like we may need more coffee, but good thing that we have got a couple more Mentimeter questions just to keep your fingers going. So quick, pull out the next question. So we've talked a little bit about, workforce mobility. Obviously we know it's important. So it'll be interesting to hear how you think, right, your organization thinks about workforce mobility. Do you think that your organization is putting enough emphasis on workforce mobility? Do you think that it's important? Okay, so let's have a look. Wow, it's great. So about 80% of you feel that your organization thinks that the workforce mobility is important. Okay, let's have a look at the next question, which is, knowing that it's important, how much emphasis is your organization placing on workforce mobility? Obviously, everyone is tackling so many different things, right? From COVID to getting the revenue back up, so many other issues as well, right? Okay, let's have a look. So there's a bit of a disparity. So while most organizations think that it's important, there's only some level of emphasis. So not quite a lot. So quite a lot more of work to be done in that. Aslam, you have a comment or question?
Yeah. Thank you. So Aslam from IHRP, thank you, Pekim, and you're right. If any of you HR here want to do a certification, come and see me. And SHRI will train you. First of all, I want to thank the panel for some fantastic sharing. Learned a lot. And I think that I have two questions. A lot of the examples you have shared will apply for very large organizations. In fact, you come from large organizations with big global footprint. So I'm going to just put my hat on as, say, if I'm a HR person in a small SME company, right? We don't have the kind of footprint you have. How do I think about, workforce mobility and talent retention? So that's the first question. The second question is, we all know that the world is changing. The US just slapped a big semiconductor restriction, right, on China. There's going to be bifurcation in technologies and there's already talk of recession coming on board. How is that going to change the dynamic for workforce mobility in the foreseeable future? So these are two questions. It's open to any panelists who wish to take it. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Aslam. Anyone else with comments or questions? And we see we can take them all together. Just looking at time, I think we've got about another 10 minutes, 15 minutes before we end. Any comments or questions? Yes, we've got one from this gentleman over here. If you could share your name and organization as well. And also, if you have a question directed at a certain panelist, let us know who it is.
Hi, I'm Jason. I just recently retired from OCBC, but I find that this panel discussion is wonderful because I think you talk about many trends that is very real. As a follow-up to Aslam's question, because in Singapore context, we do have global companies, but not in the same size as what you see perhaps in the West. When you design a global mobility for workforce, there are a few key factors you need to think about. And when Peking talk about organizing a workforce in different time zones, how does a global company think about where to put the workers? Because you talk about transfer pricing, it talks about tax. Are you talking about actual employee or are you talking about gig worker? And with gig worker, you have other challenges. So perhaps I'd like to hear the thoughts from a panel. What are you going to do if you are planning and designing a global workforce? Not just from a country-specific purpose. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've got three questions. So one is about, as an SME, how do I think about workforce mobility? Anyone would like to chime in? Peter, maybe you want to...
I'm happy to address that, Aslam. It's a very important question, and the reality is that most countries, the majority of people work in SMEs. And as you said, they don't often have a lot of big HR resources and all the rest of it. Now, SMEs at one level have some advantages. There's been a lot of research over the years about what young people want, and some of the things we've already talked about on the panel is they want more say in what goes on, they want more autonomy, they want more voice. and many of them would look at large organizations and say, well, I'm not sure I'm going to get that. I'm going to be one of 10,000 people. So SME, and indeed what Faisal talked about in terms of entrepreneurship, a lot of them want to say, if I work in an SME, I can be more entrepreneurial. So actually there are some attractors in the SME sector which have been very, very important. But I think all the principles that we talked about still apply. And they're not always rocket science. They don't require lots of money necessarily. But it is about how do you create engagement within your organization. It is about how you're creating jobs which are meaningful, which give some sense of progression. And that also that your manager is well trained. This is something which I think we have not done a good enough job in most organizations, which is just making the manager aware that a key part of their job is how they engage their team and how they help them understand things like progression opportunities and how you help overcome what Pek Kem rightly said is that this is not your person, this is a person that can work within the organization. And I think those principles apply just as much as in SMEs. And I've worked a lot with SMEs and SME leaders, and many of them get this because they know that I'm a small organization, I've got 100 people, and if those 100 people leave, I have no business. So a focus on these sorts of things and those key principles, I think, are what help SMEs to thrive. And that, as I said, I think they have advantages against the bigger organizations. But I do want to emphasize this point about training managers. Training managers to understand about resources, training managers to understand about how to look after their people, how to listen to them more. Because when you think about the things that attract and retain people, things like, as I said, do I have a voice? And they believe they may have a voice in SMEs, rightly or wrongly, but they should have a voice in big organizations as well. And what are the skills and capabilities you're going to help me to develop? And it's not always about formal training. It's what you're doing as a manager to help encourage me, give me projects, give me opportunities. And those can apply in SMEs just as much as those apply in big organizations. So I think it's back to an understanding of a lot of the principles we talked about on the panel and saying, you know what, those are pretty universal principles. And if we can apply them more consistently, then we can all improve the workplaces which we are supporting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to add to that, Peter, what I would say is that you have a very unique opportunity to really personally get to know somebody in a smaller organization, right? When you have those deeper kind of one-to-one conversations, get to understand, what is this person's passion, what is this person's aspiration, you're able to cater and tweak a whole lot more than we are in larger organizations, right? There isn't a one-size-fits-all, and yet because of the volume of people that we have to cater to, we do often have to balance that very carefully. So I would say as an HR person, really get to know your people, get to know what's driving them, what experience, where are there opportunities to learn, and then, solve for a business need, utilizing that as a stretch opportunity.
Yeah, if I could add, when I used to work in Hewlett Packard in Depot Road a few centuries ago. So Depot Road is high-end manufacturing. So I used to be a production manager. And even our molding room, those who are of you, wet works, they mold plastic parts and all that. It is air-conditioned, the floor is clean, safety factors, and my production operators wear uniforms, smart uniforms and all that. Right across the road at Ayer Rajah Crescent are JTC flatted factories. And you have SMEs that are like printing shops and all that. It's noisy and, the floor is wet and it's oily and all that. So I was a production manager. So we were having a hard time trying to hire production operators because nobody wants to be production operators in Singapore, right? So we had to hire from Malaysia and so on and so forth. So we're saying, why is it that people would work in this SME, noisy, dirty, flatted factory that has no aircon, when we have aircon, 2 tea breaks a day, shift, and we make sure you wear earplugs and all that, so it's very safe environment. So the HR manager was saying, you see in those small SMEs, I think to Pooja's point, because it's small SME, they know all their employees, and when the employee maybe getting married or son getting married, hey, Tauke, can borrow your Mercedes or not for the son's wedding? Yeah, sure. Use it. Can you imagine you go and tell, MD, can borrow your BMW for my son's wedding? Not possible. or not so likely. So I think SME have some of those attributes. My son's, when he graduated, I said, hey, why don't you join public service? No, I'll join a startup. Okay. Because there are different motivations. They have a lot more autonomy. And even in public service, I created a few departments that are literally startup. Even the CHRO office, okay, is a startup. So I had I used to say, my CHRO office, only 3 nyaw kia, 3 little kittens. That's how we started up. And I intentionally kept it small because the biggest advantage is you have the agility and the mobility. Okay, whatever you want to do, let's try it. Okay, and then we prototype. After it works, okay, then we can scale. I started a career transition unit, small, try it out. If it works, then we'll scale. Okay, so some of these programs, tapping on the benefits of having an SME and being close enough, and you are itself the company that can experiment, and it's quite a risk-free environment.
What I'm taking away from this, responses to Aslam's earlier question, really it's about playing to the strength of your organization. So if you're large, you have resources, tap on that. But if you're small, then tap on agility, tap on the very fact that you are closer, right? And play that to your strength. I know Aslam's got a second question. I'm going to use that as a way to kind of wrap up our conversation about global trends and how it's affecting. But I do want to get a bit of a comment back to Jason's question about how do we look at the deployment, right, of people? Is it using gig, or how do you actually think about it? So maybe I'll tap on Faizi as well as Pooja, just from your perspective. Just a very short answer from both of you, and then we'll go to the Aslam's second question.
I gather being in a big organization, there is this thing, what we call organizational drag. Right? Organizational drag are all the bureaucracies that's holding us from doing what is needed in a quick and at pace manner. So I gather it is still, in the context of Petronas, something that we identify. Like, say, for example, gig, we have recognized that there are, a number of people out there with certain skills and qualities that can be complementing the skills that we have within the organization. But overcoming the organizational drag is something that needs to be done quickly. I mean, there's governance thingy that will need to be addressed and policy thingies that will need to be addressed. So I wouldn't say that in totality we're able to address all of them, but definitely we have identified that these are the, in a way, blockers that will need to be addressed in order to really free up. Because there's this thing that, talent that you want is not in your organization, right? I think that's the premise for any, what do you call that? Exponential organization, right? So exponential organization have this belief, employees that you want are not in your organization. They're elsewhere, somewhere doing different things, but you can still actually access those capabilities and competencies. So the question is like what you say, how do we unleash that, addressing all the issues that comes along with it, particularly if, big organization becomes a lot more concerned, Petronas, all right, so there's other things to consider, yeah.
Thank you.
So we're obviously a regulated business, right? So slightly different and yet very similar in the sense that, we hire incredibly smart, intellectual people who want to move at speed. Yet we have that other side of the coin where, because we're a regulated business, we can't necessarily move as quickly, right? So it's finding that balance, right? We've had most recently, with the regulators in Japan changing some of their policies. How do we react? How do we respond? Those regulations didn't drop just suddenly, right? They've been in making, they've been in policy reviews, et cetera. One of the things that we've heard most commonly now, being a very centralized organization, is how do we decentralize a little bit? How do you empower your people locally to be better able to address what's happening in their marketplace, and then giving them the autonomy to go and explore in a sandbox environment, if you will. We don't quite call it that, but in that safety zone, right? And then also coming back and influencing that policy, right? When they were Refinitiv, they didn't have necessarily the same opportunity. Now that we are LSEG, there is that additional kind of brand and value that we can bring to the table to influence externally as well.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have just enough time to answer Aslam's question as a way to wrap up. But before we do, I'm going to pull out the final Mentimeter question for all of you. If you could, just in one word, in one word, describe your key learning from today's conversation. So I'll give you some time to put in just one word as a form of a word cloud, just to give a bit of feedback to how much you've taken away from this conversation. But while you're doing that, then let's really think about this topic. So we started the conversation, painting definitions of what workforce mobility, and we talked about how we moved away from the traditional geographical moving from one location to another location to something a lot more strategic. We talked about mindsets, we talked about competencies, and then we looked at how, what are some challenges that organizations are faced today in terms of workforce mobility, and what are some of your organizations doing in terms of tackling this, right? From structured programs to creating sandboxes, creating opportunities, understanding the passions and different streaks for different folks. And now let's talk a little bit about the future, right? Knowing everything, and I think Peter alluded to that already in your opening address, talking about how the world has changed, even just within this 10 years since since we first met in Singapore. So in your mind, from your own organization's perspective, looking at everything that you guys are working on, planning ahead, I mean, obviously strategy is important. What would be a one sentence that you would say in terms of how do you feel this trend is going to look like? What is the global trend? What is affecting workforce mobility? What does the next 10 years look like for this particular topic? If we were to come back here in 10 years' time, what do you think the topic would look like? I'm going to leave Peter to be the last one, okay? I'll save you for the last. So maybe I'll start with Pooja, go to Fazli, and then come to Peckham.
So I just want to confirm the question. It's in 10 years' time.
Yeah, how does this look like?
Yeah.
What is this topic going to look like in 10 years' time?
I think it's going to be very exciting in the sense where I think this push for globalization will continue. I think we're going to take this is not one sentence. You're going to have to forgive me. You didn't give me enough time to think. But I would say that opportunities. What I really think is going to happen is that educational privilege that a lot of us in the room have, that divide will go down. as we continue making education more accessible, which means in terms of workforce mobility, it creates a whole new world where it really is, it doesn't matter where you came from, you're going to start off, being able to contribute and really push the needle in terms of what corporations look like, right, and what they can deliver.
Yeah, because of the education gap, right? Thank you. Fazi.
The word that comes into my mind is human-centered transformation. All right. What it meant really is going back to the people. Like say, for example, you were mentioning a bit digital divides or education divide. Really looking at the aspiration of the people, looking at the energy that the people has. How do we leverage on that? Leveraging on that energy. And for organizations such as Petronas, how do we provide that enabling condition for people to continue to grow, to continue to be motivated from their lens, not from organizational lens. I think being an engineering company, sorry, a bit long, is that we tend to like technical solution, right? So the more technical, the more complex the solution, the more we love it, right? So how do we break down all of those and say, what is it that the people really need? And how do we make sure that the path between what they want and where they are is as close as we possibly can get. All right.
Thank you. Very nice. Human-centeredness. Peggy?
Well, I think in the future, increasingly, work is going to be more democratized. So what's going to happen is, we are going to say, I need this kind of result, and this is the kind of resources that are required. And with the level of technology and also the trend where, it's easier to really acquire talent from different sources, and it's beyond just geographical, okay? It's beyond age, gender, and so on and so forth. And our ability to look beyond just, retirement age at 65 or 68 or what have you. Because those who are beyond that still have a lot of skills, wisdom, and competency which can really benefit the organization. And if we stop looking at HR or looking at our employees as my people, and it's only 9 to 5 or what have you, and really look at what is it that we want to get done. There are so much opportunities, and there are so much talent out there that if we are able to sort it out and get it done right. So I know for a fact in Singapore, there is a movement on healthy longevity, where we are trying to start with the Queenstown precinct, where we are looking at how do I marry people who are going to or retired, who would like to work 4 to 5 hours a day, and match them to companies who are able to absorb this kind of talent. And Singapore is very talent short, right? Because of a pathetic fertility rate. And if we could marry those, including women who are returning to the workforce. So this is a movement that we are trying out at Queenstown. And if it works in Queenstown, we're going to scale it to the whole of Singapore. And if we are able to do this, I think if any country is going to make this work, it's going to be in Singapore because we are small enough. It's like an SME, in the global stage. And the environment is such that we are also aging quite rapidly. So other countries can actually look towards Singapore and use us as an example.
Thank you. Peter, last words.
Yeah, during the lockdown I wrote a book on all of this, so it's all in the book actually. It's called The New World of Work. But anyway, I've been fascinated by these trends for many years. And so when you look ahead 10 years, I think, first of all, two great quotes I'd use. One is from Peter Drucker, which is the best way to predict the future is to help to shape it. And we have more opportunity to do that than we've ever had before. The other is from William Gibson, a science fiction writer, who said that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And you think about that for a second, you think, when you look at organizations today, the first thing I'd observe, and that I've observed for a number of years over my career, is that we've moved away from the idea that there's one standard way to do everything. Here's the standard practice, here's even the best practice, to the idea that actually, it's about context, it's about best fit, it's about understanding the context of your organization, small or large, about the kind of skills and talent and capabilities you really need to have. And that means that we have lots of different models and lots of different ways of thinking of the organization of the future. There are some organizations that describe themselves as holocracies, and it's a democracy. You can kind of figure out what you want to do and when you want to do it. No rules at all. And I always say, well, that's great, but if you're running an oil refinery, I hope you've got a lot of rules, right? So it's about lots of different contexts and lots of different ways of thinking. But I would echo what Faizi said and what I said in the beginning of my remarks too, is that the future's got to be shaped. The future work has got to be shaped by the idea of what is good for people. And we have not always driven our businesses from that regard. I often quote Milton Friedman, the American Nobel Prize-winning economist in the 1970s, who said that the sole purpose of business is to make profit. And you look at the last 30, 40 years and think, yeah, that seems to have driven an awful lot of thinking in so many businesses. It's just about profit, money, and people as resources and cost. And then, to pick up on Aslan's point about we are moving into an environment, certainly now and in the next few years, where it's going to be a lot tougher economically. And the pressure on businesses to manage their costs more effectively, which brings other effects, like people saying, well, actually, the thing I'm looking for now is job security. Is my job still going to be here? And of course, we're back into the same challenge with business leadership, which says, okay, so this is about cutting costs. And guess what? One of my biggest flexible costs is people, or how much I invest in them in terms of training. And we have to resist these pressures. And so, therefore, I think the future, I think we have to look at it optimistically. I think we have the opportunity to shape a future which is good for people, where work is good for us, which is good for our longevity, it's good for our well-being, it's good for society. And fundamentally, I believe, therefore, that business has got to take its role much more in all of our societies to say, no, business has got to be a force for good. We've got to act responsibly. We've got to understand all these different things that are driving our future, whether it's the environment or our people or our societies. And if we embed those principles in our thinking about the future and build jobs that are good for people on the principle of good jobs, and then adapt our context and our environment to meet the context and environment in which we're in, then I think we should look forward to the future and say, wow, there are a lot of opportunities. Maybe we'll all be working 4-day working weeks, for example. But it will be more inclusive, and it will be fairer, and it will give more opportunity for people to, as I said, have great lives and great working lives. And I would just conclude by saying that I couldn't figure out how to finish the book until I found this piece of research done by a think tank in the UK called the Centre for Aging Better. And they'd asked people who'd recently retired, what did they most miss from work? Now, what do you think they would have said? What would be the things that you think people would say when they've retired, and what did they miss from work? People, absolutely, and social relationships. Friends, absolutely. So social relationships. Anything else? Well, there are things like sense of purpose and all of those sorts of ideas, which are really important. But sadly, the thing that dominated by far as the response was absolutely nothing at all. You think, what? So you spent the last 45 years of your life, and all you can say about that is, thank God that's all over, right? So if I want to leave you with a final message, it is that we have the opportunity to shape work that is better for people, more meaningful, more purposeful, more inclusive, safer, so that they're not coming to the end of their working lives and think, thank God that's all over, and I'm looking forward to retirement. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give a big round of applause for my wonderful panelists. Thank you. And a round of applause for yourself as well for being such a fantastic audience. And I'm handing time back to our CIPD team. Thank you.
Morning. I think that was a fantastic session, or sessions, conversations. My name is Tony Asude. Good to meet you all. Old friends, new friends. So I think the takeaway from today is it's interesting. I've been working in and around Singapore. I grew up here for part of my life for a number of years. I can see the change. So the difference now from where we were even 10 years ago, 12 years ago, is we're discussing about wellness, well-being, and not necessarily about sort of, it's certainly in 2006, 2005, it was all about talent management and recruitment and what have you. So we've actually moved on tremendously in terms of that growth. So I think that you can hear that from the team today, and you can see that from the panel in terms of that sort of growth. So I thank you for coming, of course, and thank you for your contributions. In terms of the sum up, what I would bring, I'd say we've moved on in terms of the discussion, in terms of moving into well-being and recruitment, D&I as well, which is quite important. We talked about that as well, in particular, sustainability. So how we sustain as organizations, as teams and people. And importantly, also, I'd like to thank my team for all the work they've done today to bring us together. So, I think for CIPD, so we're here to grow the profession, to support you, and to actually support the industry and the economy in Singapore, in Malaysia, in the region. So part of what we're doing today is building that community, the network, the connections. So I hope that as we go forward, we continue to actually do that. This should be one of many, many connections that we build going forward. So I'll just close by saying thank you to the team, thank you to Peter, and thank you to the panelists and PegChem, and who've given great service to the profession across the years, decades or maybe even years. So thank you all.